Good morning, children. Today we are going to study the chapter Economic Reforms 1991. In the previous chapter, first two chapter which we have studied, that was on the eve of independence, and second was Indian economy 1950 to 1990. So in both the chapter, if you remember, in the first chapter we have seen how British came India and destroyed our economy badly, and we got a stagnant, backward, amputed, distorted kind of economy. In the second chapter, we have seen that how our policymakers and our ministers, they followed the 5-year plans and implemented in the country. Even after we have seen that uh, whatever the plans was executed, implemented, and even whether it's agricultural reform, whether it's industrial reform, whether it's foreign trade, each and every reform we tried to make to achieve the goals which we had to achieve, that was growth, equity, self-reliance, modernizations. Though after implementing these all things, only one or two we were able to achieve. If we talk about the growth, we were totally failed in this field. If you remember critical appraisal, I have taught you, in that I have explained you how negative impact was there in the economic growth. Even after we were not equally, each and every person's per capita income was not equitable. So there was requirement, there was much requirement that there should be one reforms, and this reform is popularly known as Economic Reforms 1991. Okay, so let's start the chapter and understand what was the situation and why we have followed this policy. And after coming this policy, what was the situation? If we talk about the previous policy, we have seen that we have given industrial licensing to the industries, even concession was provided. If we talk about the foreign trade, we had followed the import substitution policy. And also we were not interacting with other countries because of closed economy we had followed. And we wanted actually to save our industry and the foreign exchange. But after that, India experienced major changes is required in the policy. So we introduced a new economic policy. This is popularly known as LPG policy. LPG policy means liberalization, privatization, and globalization. We had a main ambition to vision to make an Indian economy was that India should be a fastest growing country. And we also wanted to become globally competitive. We wanted to do the world trade in the international market. For that, we had to be very much strong at the domestic level, and also we wanted to develop our financial sector so that our economy should be more efficient and all. But was why we required these all policy, why we required the economic reforms, basically, if the we have a question then. So we'll see the reason for the implementing this policy was the fiscal deficit. If we see, I hope you all are knowing. If you are not knowing what is the meaning of fiscal deficit, so let me tell you. Fiscal deficit means when the total expenditure, here expenditure, we are talking about total capital expenditure and revenue expenditure, means if the total expenditure of the government exceed with the total income again, both kind of revenue and capital. So that scenario is known as fiscal deficit. Means you can understand that India was having the problem of fiscal deficit. The expenditure was more than the total income. So if we see the ratio, the fiscal deficit was rose 12.1 to means in 1991 it was around a highest deficit we had. Second problem we had, that the efficiency of resources was not properly utilized. We had inefficiency because of lack of modernized technique and lack of human capital. If we talk about foreign exchange reserve, that was badly, means adverse effect was in foreign exchange reserve. Around 1.2 million there was fall in the foreign exchange reserve from the previous condition. Inflation rate, it's really a pathetic condition that India faced. Year 1990 of the country, Indian economy is also known as depression economy, because in India that time we had experienced the highest inflation in the country. Inflation means, we all know, that means when there is a rise in price of each and every commodity. So that time, or we can say when the aggregate demand is rather increased than the aggregate supply. So there was a condition that India faced such a highest inflationary condition in the year up till the year 1990. That was the condition, that the rate, if we talk about total exchange high inflationary rate, was around 13.87. In some of the book you will find 16 point something. So whatever it is written in the NCERT, that rate we are going to follow. But this topic will not be asked in the examination. Just you should know that why LPG policy we implemented. The reason was only that there was a fiscal deficit in the country, inefficiency of the use of resources, we had an adverse effect on foreign exchange reserve, and there was high inflationary condition in the country. Lot prices were going day by day, it was increasing, and uh, we had a problem of to take a loan also. The such kind of condition was there. In fact, the growth rate of Indian economy was becoming stagnant, though we were increasing each and everything. Even after, we were not able to increase the growth rate. It was around 3.5% from 1950 to 1990. It just only, and the per capita income was around 1.3%, which is not so good rate. If we talk about BOP condition, balance of payment, I hope you all know the difference between total export and total import of the nation. So it was adversely, balance of payment was adverse. Now, adverse means you must be having the knowledge about when the total import means total outflow of the foreign currency was more than the inflow of the foreign currency. Here I have given you rate that 2,214 crore was in 1980 to 81. Now the deficit was, means adverse condition was 17,367 crore in 1991. You just understand what was the BOP condition. Means we were totally in the condition that unless or until we'll take the loan from the other countries or a World Bank, will not be able to overcome from the situation. So, what India has taken the situation to deal these all things. Before going into the entire concept, let's have the synopsis. What we have to study actually in this chapter. First, we have to study new economic policy. What was it? How it is? What was the main motto of bringing this? Means introduction. We have to get to know. Then after, we will study liberalization. As I told you, new economic policy is also known as LPG policy, means liberalization, privatization, and globalization. So we'll study entire thing in detail. Under liberalization, we have to study 5 type of reforms: industrial reforms, financial reform, fiscal reform, foreign exchange reform, and investment reforms. After that, we will study privatization, and under that, what measures we have taken, what was the positive and negative impact. Then globalization, also same measures and positive and negative impact. Then finally, we will study what was the critical appraisal. Was LPG policy successful? So we'll get to know about the arguments in favor of and arguments in against of. So this 5 topic we have to study, and this is very important chapter. So if we talk about all 3 chapter, first, second, third, combine these 3 chapter, 12 mark question will be asked in the examination. So that's why I'm giving you stress to these chapters, so that you can study and understand it properly. So let's start. What is new economic policy? As I told, the condition was very worse due to some of the reason. Reason was adverse balance of payment, adverse foreign exchange rate, fall in deficit of fiscal deficit. Means these all the problems. So that's why India approached to International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, means IBRD, which is also known as World Bank. In that, they approached to have the around $7 billion loan, and we were able to manage it from the World Bank. That $7 billion we have taken loan, we are paying back. We have not overcome from those payments, okay, those loans. Why we have taken this loan? Just to overcome from the crisis which we have, the crisis which was in happened due to the policy which we have implemented. So NAP was introduced in July 1991, and under that the policy was classified into two parts. One, we had to stabilize our economy, so stabilization measures was taken. In that two main point we have to discuss, that stabilization measures was taken to correct the weakness that developed the BOP condition. Naturally, we have seen the BOP condition was not so good, so we have to correct those condition. BOP condition, you have seen around 2000 crore, it was the deficit in the till the 15 to 80. Now after that, in the after 80, it was around 12,000 approx. So it is huge. There was a huge fall in BOP condition. So our first motto was to we have to correct the weakness of BOP condition, and second we have to bring down the inflationary condition in India. Means we had to control on the rise on price. The second measures which was taken in the LPG and NEP policy, that was structural measures. Means we had to rebuild our economy, rebuild our structure of the economy. In that, two major things was taken, that improving the efficiency of the economy, and second, increasing the international competitiveness. Means we had to become an open economy, we had to deal with the other countries. So this was follows. These policy initiated by the government, also known as NEP policy, means new economic policy, or we can say LPG. Means under NEP policy, LPG policy was implemented, that is liberalization, privatization, and globalization. So let's see one by one these economic policy. First, we will study in this. Today, I am going to teach you only one, that is liberalization. So under liberalization, what we had taken the measures, and what is actually liberalization. Liberalization means process of opening up Indian economy to trade and investment with the rest of the world. Means we wanted to be liberal, we wanted to give the all the rights, all the freedom to all the trade and financial and the industrial sector to interact with the other nations, and also to other nation to interact with us. So it means that opening the door for doing business to all over the world. This was the actually liberalization. Till 1991, India had an import protection policy, which is also known as EXIM policy, where trade with the rest of the world was limited to export. If you remember import substitution, we have studied the EXIM policy, export import policy. The foreign investment was very difficult because of closed economy we were following, and also bureaucratic framework was there. There was a lot of problem that we had to face. So after the start of economic liberalization, the India started getting huge capital inflow, which earlier we had a, naturally we have seen there was a fastest outflow in India. Now after following liberalization policy, India faced inflow of the capital, and it has emerged the second fastest growing country in the world. This was a good sign after implementing the liberalization. If you are going to see, liberalization is actually, what is it? It was introduced to put an end. This is the definition you can write down. The liberalization was introduced to put an end to these restrictions and open various sectors of the economy. Though liberalization measures were introduced in 1980s in area of industrial licensing, EXIM policy, technology upgradation, fiscal policy, foreign investment, reform policy initiated in 91. Actually, what is the correct definition if you have to write down? Liberalization was introduced to put an end to these restrictions and open various sectors of the economy. If we see very minutely, so here this was started in the year 1980, and specifically in the particular field. These fields are industrial licensing, export import policy, technology upgradation, fiscal policy, and foreign investment. Reforms, these were initiated in the year 1991, and it became more comprehensive in these field only. If you, there is very much important to see which field actually we focused in the policy NAP policy of 1991. That is very, very important in this chapter. You need to understand. If we see what reforms were taken under liberalization, I have already told you 5 reforms we have to study: industrial reforms, financial reforms, fiscal reforms, foreign exchange reforms, trade and investment reforms. If we are going to see industrial sector reforms, what actual steps were taken to change the scenario? If you remember the previous, what we had, 3 measures we had. What was the threefold classification? Then after industrial licensing, then after concession. But now the condition totally scenario change in industrial reforms. Now industrial licensing were abolished. Now you may have a question to why we have implemented that time. That time we have implemented because we were just checking the plan that if we are giving the restriction to enter the other private sector or other sector to come to to develop the Indian economy, so there will be naturally there will be the power will be curve in the concentrate in the certain sector. So see, we wanted to avoid them, we wanted to stop them, that they should not enter to the these industrial sector. Now what, after the 7 5-year plans, we understood, yeah, we felt that prohibition of private sector into the industrial sector was not good. So we need to just erase this policy, we need to abolish this policy. So industrial licensing policy was abolished. If we see the role of public sector before, prior, naturally when the question will be asked, deal liberalization, and under that if the question will be asked what industrial reforms were taken after 1991, so these points you are going to write, and in these points what dealing you will do, what was the condition before 90 and what is the condition after 90. Okay, so in this manner you have to write down. So as I have explained, the first point, abolition of industrial licensing, what we have to write down, before 90 what was the condition. We have seen before 90 the only whichever industry wanted to open their industry or any unit, they had to acquire licensing, and it was very time taken procedure, it was very tough to take the license. But after 1991 what happened, this industrial licensing policy was abolished completely. Now each and every sector, I mean either private sector or public sector, they can open any unit of their industry. Means for the opening of each and every unit they need not to acquire a license, except some of the field, some of this like hazardous product if it is, or which is not good for the social cause or environment, for those product only they had to acquire license. See, second one, decrease in the role of public sector. If you remember previous, before 90, what was the condition? We have given all the power to the public sector. Public sector, we have given all the freedom, even all the topmost industries, the first category, if you remember, all the industry was in hand of public sector. In the second category, if you remember, that was also shared between public and private. Now what happened? We decrease the public sector. Why? We decrease the role of public sector because of public sector, as we had expected, they had not performed accordingly. So, and also there was a lot of losses also there. And if we see, the sum of the unit became sick unit, they converted into sick unit, and we had to close those industry. So it was a big loss for the government, big loss for the nation. So we decreased the role of public sector. Now only few industry were given to the public sector. Third, de-reservation of production by small-scale industries. Now, earlier there was some of the product which was only produced by the some of the large-scale industries, and some only by the small-scale industry. Now, this reservation was cancelled. Now, most of the product, which is around 745 product, can be produced by small-scale industry. Previously, the price determined by the of the product was partial government and partial market forces. Now, most of the prices of the product was to determined by the market forces, means by the demand and supply. Previously, we were totally closed following closed economy, so we were not interacting with the nations to do the export and import. Now we followed open economy. So for that, we wanted to do the international trade. In that, it was decided that we will do only import from the foreign country of capital goods. So let's see little detail about it. Industrial licensing, under which each and every entrepreneur had to get permission from the government official to start a firm, so or a close a firm, or decide what amount of goods that they can produce and they can not produce. So now this process was eliminated. Private sector was not allowed in many industry previously, but now the private sector can enter to the in this field. Some goods could be produced only in small scale industry earlier, so now there was these reservation. Now each and every product can be produced either by the large scale or by the small scale. There was control on price fixation and distribution of selected industrial product. Now this was totally determined by market forces. I hope you understood these all things. If we talk about the reforms policy introduced in and after 91 to remove many of these restrictions. Okay, industrial licensing was abolished, as I told you, for almost all but product like categories of alcohol, cigarette, hazardous chemical, or any explosive, electronic, aerospace, drugs, pharmaceuticals. These only was in hand of government. They had to take the permission from the government, then only they can open these industry. The only industry which were now reserved for the public sector are a part of defense, equipment, atomic energy, and railway transport. Only these industry was in hand of government. You can understand the situation. Now most of the industry was given to the private sector. Only few industry was kept under the control of the government. Many goods produced by the small scale now have been de-reserved. As I told that previously, the many type of small product was produced only by the small scale industry. The large scale industry cannot get enter into it. Now these product can be produced by the large scale industry also, small scale industry also. So now there was a reservation was totally cancelled. In many industry, the market has been allowed to determine the prices. Previously it was not. Previously it was fixed by the government. Okay, so this much we have studied today, and if any question, any doubt, if you have, do ask me. Prepare the notes as I have explained you. Just go through the synopsis first, write down the synopsis, and accordingly you will make the notes. There is no requirement to write down what was the need of LPG policy. Only you need to understand when you are going to explain, you will have to explain about these things, because this was the condition, so we had followed this. But this will not be asked in the examination. Write the causes of, write the need of NEP policy. Okay, so what exactly will be asked in the examination? Directly LPG policy they will ask you. The liberalization, all five we will study one by one. Today I have explained you only one, that was industrial reforms. Tomorrow I'll teach you the next one. Okay, thank you.